This is ESPN Chicago's Jonathan Hood on our show. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
Doing very well. How are you?
Doing great. Now, for the Buffalo Bills, I mean, if the Bills were to go 10-6, the head coach would probably get the key to the city. Yet in Chicago, it was enough to get him fired. Why do you think that was?
The reason why that Lovie Smith was let go by Chicago is because that he's been the head coach for the Bears for 9 years. And I think that the expectations are pretty high in a big market like Chicago when you're the head coach for 9 years and you don't reach your goal of winning the Vince Lombardi Trophy. That's a big deal here. There's not a lot of patience in Chicago, and I think that the McCaskey family was very patient with Lovie Smith, waiting for the offense to really come together. One Super Bowl appearance, several division championships is great, but the bottom line is, in any business, you want to reach your ultimate goal, and unfortunately, Lovie Smith could not do that. His downfall was because his offense never was able to match his defense. The defense has been opportunistic for a long time under his tenure, under his leadership as a defensive guy, but the offensive coordinators have been going through the turnstiles pretty often. I think it's been 3 or either 4 offensive coordinators while Lovie Smith was the head coach. And the highest the offense ever was 16th, and that was a Super Bowl year in which they took on Indianapolis. So the offense ultimately was a downfall because it never reached its full potential, and it was never able to match the defense, and that's why a change was made.
You've had players like Devin Hester and Charles Tillman, even former Bear great Mike Ditka, express frustration over Lovie's dismissal. What does the city of Chicago think about GM Phil Emery right now, and how much job security do you think he has going forward?
Phil Emery spoke on January 1st, and he talked a lot about the issues with this football team. And I think people really enjoyed the thorough press conference that he had because it lasted 54 minutes, and he answered every question. As a matter of fact, I've never seen a general manager wear down the press. But he actually wore it on the press. Usually the press wears down an athlete or a sports figure. Usually it's that way. But in this case, Emery, because of his thorough answers, wore down the press where they had no more questions for him. Emery addressed why the offense did not click the way it should because they did not utilize guys like Earl Bennett, did not utilize Devin Hester correctly, did not utilize Matt Forte, one of the better running backs in the league. So what he wanted to do is he addressed that. He talked about the draft strategy, why they did not go after an offensive lineman to help protect Jay Cutler, and why they went with Alshon Jeffrey, a wide receiver, addressed the defense and some of the age issues on that defense, and talked about a lot of different things. So I think the fan base is pretty happy about what they heard from Emery. Now everyone is on pins and needles here trying to figure out who the next head coach is going to be, and will this coach be able to push Chicago to where they want to be.
Now, you talk about, obviously, I think at this point it's obvious that Chicago Bears have to go after an offensive-minded coach. We haven't heard much of them looking for anybody. Do you know any candidates? I know Bruce Arians was thrown out there. Obviously, they're playing this week, so he can't interview. But can you give us some insight on who exactly the Bears are looking at to be the next head coach?
We can only speculate. Emery did not make that very clear at all to anybody that talked to him the other day. You could just tell, though, that he probably wants someone on the offensive side of the football, only because he stressed the fact that the offense did not match what the defense did. So, it could be anywhere from Mike McCoy, where he's waiting for McCoy to end his time with Denver after their playoff run, to Arians, who's 60 years old, who's been around for a long time, Tom Clements, who's the offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers, also will be interviewed. Same thing with Keith Armstrong. He was the first interview, special teams coach for Tampa. So he's talking to an array of people. But one of the things that really stuck out to the press conference, guys, is the fact that he wants to have someone with energy in the building, someone that is that can understand how to evaluate talent, not just based on the eye test, but also from numbers. This is the first time in our town that we've heard the Moneyball theory thrown out there from the football side, meaning that it's about stats, it's about trends for a player, as well as taking a really hard look at a player through a scouting lens. So this is going to be kind of a whole different deal for the Bears, whoever the head coach is under Emery being the general manager.
Looking back at this past season, you've had players like Jay Cutler, Matt Forte, Brandon Marshall. Why do you think the offense struggled last season?
The offense struggled last season because the offensive line was horrible. It was really bad, and it was bad last year too. When you do not have protection for your quarterback, it's very you can't do play action. You cannot run the ball effectively, and it really bothers Jay Cutler and his process and what he wants to do offensively, trying to get the ball out. What we saw during this, and I know it. If you take a step back, there are so many that look at the Bears 7-1 start and say, boy, everything is clicking. The reason why everything looked like it was clicking is because the defense was opportunistic. They were able to get not only turnovers, but also return those for touchdowns. They were doing the job of not only the defense was doing the job of their job, the offensive job, and the special teams job. They were doing everything. And that's why the Bears did so well through the first 8 games. Then the schedule flipped against teams like San Francisco and Houston, and it didn't work out well against Seattle as well. And that's one of the reasons why the Bears are in this position right now on the outside looking in the playoffs. But the offense is the major reason why the Bears aren't in the position they're in now. That offensive line, Cutler had one target, and that was to Brandon Marshall. Devin Hester will never be the wide receiver that they thought he was going to be. Bennett was hurt for a while, so it's a lack of weapons. And on top of that, the line, especially for the majority of the season, just wasn't very good. The offense, through 17 weeks, was never able to put together back-to-back weeks of sustained success, and that's why the Bears are 10-6 out of the playoffs.
Now, you talk about the offensive line being a major issue with the Chicago Bears offense. So do you think that comes down to evaluations in terms of the GM, in terms of drafting and getting guys in there on offensive line? Or does that affect Lovie Smith? Should it came down to him, or should it came down to the GM for not getting them the necessary pieces on the line?
When a franchise fails, you blame the entire team. That means players, that means the coaches, that means the general manager. This is the first year for Phil Emery as the general manager for the Bears. Before that, it was Jerry Angelo, the general manager of the Bears, and he did not do his due diligence to try to acquire the proper talent to build that offensive line. So Emery and Lovie Smith were left with the cupboard bare on the offensive line. Any time that you see an offensive line and you see guys that you draft that are not working out, you have to replace them. You have no other choice. Now, there was an explanation on New Year's Day from Emery talking about how he liked certain players and liked the age of certain players. But if those guys are getting spun like a turnstile, if those guys can't block, then your quarterback is going to have an issue. There's a reason why Cutler had yet another concussion here this year, is because the offensive line didn't block. Now, there were some things that Mike Tice, the offensive coordinator, was able to do by trying to put in an extra tight end, putting in an extra fullback to try to help block. But that offensive line was a mess, starting with Jerry Angelo, the old general manager, and then Phil Emery not addressing it last season, just believing that eventually those guys would be able to work together, and they weren't. So, going into this offseason, this is going to be a strong thing that they're going to have to really focus on, the offensive line, and try to protect Cutler to see whether or not the line, is it the line, is it Cutler, is it the players on the offense? We're going to find out next season for sure.
You talk about Jay Cutler, and what are the fans of Chicago and the Bears' long-term expectations for Jay Cutler? I'm a fan of him. I don't care what his sideline demeanor is. I think he's a good quarterback if he gets protection, but what's it like in Chicago?
I think it's 50-50. Our station carries the Jay Cutler show the day after every Bears game, and when you sit and listen to him talk for an hour, I think that he realizes that there are some that are with him and some that are not. That's just part of an NFL city. But I think that just based on the calls that I take on my show, I think that it's about 70-30 that people support Jay Cutler. Some believe that he's a poor man's Jeff George. Others believe that he is going to eventually be no better than Philip Rivers. And that's an interesting dynamic when you think about Cutler and his tools and his skill set. He has a strong arm. He can utilize his legs to be able to get out of situations. He had to do that a lot last year where there was nobody open. He had to run for the first down. That was one of the big plays in the last game that the Bears played against Detroit in order for them to win. Him utilizing his legs and able to kind of think on his feet. bottom line also is that he's not very good when it comes to just the fundamentals of the game. You would never want your kid to learn from Jay Cutler because he's going to improvise, and this is the kind of quarterback that he is. I've held steady on him being a top 10 quarterback, right at number 10 amongst the quarterbacks. But I think that sinks a little bit because there were times where the line did hold up and Cutler was unable to really help the offense and move it forward. So, again, this upcoming season will tell a really strong story, more so than I could, about what Jay Cutler is and what he can be with his, I think, fifth offensive coordinator.
Now, this past season's Bears offense was one of the worst in the NFL, but it reminded me a lot of the Randy ratio that Mike Tice created in Minnesota. How similar do you think it was?
Well, I think that Tice really, this was his first deal as an offensive coordinator, and there was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of tension between Cutler and Mike Tice, a lot of it. And I think that happens when you have Tice for the first time really calling plays and calling them in too slowly. There was, I think, almost every game, guys, there was a timeout called in the first quarter or second quarter of every game that was played this year because Tice didn't get the plays in on time. And, when you're in an offense and you're in a rhythm, you want to just keep the ball moving. And I thought that there was a disconnect there at times between Cutler and Tice. Again, you don't want to have your your franchise quarterback dealing with so many different voices and so many different schemes and strategies. But, he's dealt with Mike Martz, he's dealt with Mike Tice, he's dealt with Ron Turner, he's dealt with Terry Shea, I think might have been toward the end. But the bottom line is there's a lot that he had to deal with. And so, unfortunately, there was no Randy ratio parallels to Tice being the offensive coordinator for the Bears.
Now, obviously, Lovie Smith gone now. There's multiple reports that he's been interested in the Bills job, and he will also interview for San Diego. Us here in Buffalo, we're wondering, would Lovie Smith, be a good fit in Buffalo?
I think he would be. If you want a scouting report on Lovie, I can give you that. Lovie Smith.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, there's no question. Lovie Smith is a hard-nosed, focused football coach who would do very well in Buffalo. He will bring his cover 2 defense to Buffalo if he's able to get that job, or San Diego, either one. He comes to the table with that cover 2. Now, some in Chicago thought that it was a little bit archaic, in which you have a cover 2 defense and there's so much open in the middle on the backside of the linebackers and in front of the corners and in front of the safeties. But this is what he believes in. He did that with the Rams. He did that 9 years with the Bears, and he really believes in that defense. And if he has the right personnel, he's going to tell that personnel, get pick sixes, get turnovers. Turnovers are important. And the turnovers were terrific in Chicago for 9 years. His teams were strong when it came to being opportunistic, getting the football, and then returning the balls a lot of times for a touchdown. Tim Jennings had a great year. I thought that Charles Tillman flourished in this defense. Same thing with Briggs and Urlacher. Those guys did a terrific job in this defense. Now, the thing that you wonder about is if he does get the job in Buffalo, who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Because Lovie has no clue and no interest in the offensive side of the football. He just doesn't. And if he does get hired in Buffalo, I think that the Bills will be a better football team defensively, but offensively, there has to be an offensive coordinator that the Bills believe in, because Lovie has no interest on that side. And you don't want to keep losing games 6-3 and 9-6. You want to be able to have someone that on the offensive side that can get that ball moving, because Lovie's going to have very little input in that. So, again, I think that Lovie, for his time here, was terrific as a head coach on the defensive side. Offensively, though, he never was able to get that match. That's what's needed in his next job as a head coach.
Now, one of the main differences between the Bills and the Bears is you have 2 Pro Bowl linebackers with Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs. So how effective do you think Tampa 2 will be with the Bills' current roster, since we don't really have any Pro Bowl caliber linebackers?
You tell me. You're going to have to draft it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the focus probably since September, October for you guys talking about is trying to find the best guys through the draft and through UFAs as possible. I mean, and you know that whoever the head coach is in Buffalo, it's not going to be a quick fix anyway. it's going to you have to build that thing. So, I mean, it's you know that Urlacher and Briggs, and again, Urlacher and Briggs came up with Lovie Smith as a head coach. That's only because that was through the draft. I mean, you're just you have to build that. Once he's able to implement his system, though, using that Tampa 2, again, no matter the system, he wants turnovers, he wants takeaways, and he wants the ball to go back to the offense. So whoever you get, I mean, it's not going to be a quick fix anyway. It wasn't a quick fix here. I remember the first year that Lovie Smith was a head coach, half the roster had hamstring pulls in training camp because they weren't in shape. And again, he had those guys moving, and had those guys. He wanted them to be lean. He didn't want big guys. He wanted his defense to play fast. He wanted his defensive players to be lean and in shape. And I remember half the roster couldn't practice because of hamstring pulls. And so that's what he looks for his defense. But you're going to have to try to draft that, just like any other team.
How do you feel about his decision-making in pressure situations? We kind of had a problem here with Chan Gailey. I mean, he didn't know when to kick a 50-yard field goal with Ryan Liddell, ended up having to take a timeout and punting the ball instead. Do you have any of those kind of issues with Lovie Smith?
Yeah, I do. I think he's probably below average in that regard. Some of his decision-making as far as the clock management. But see, here's the thing. I can criticize that because I've seen his resume for 9 years. Chan Gailey or other coaches around the National Football League have 3 years, maybe 4 years at the most, and they get fired. I've seen him for 9 years, so I can punch holes in his resume and look at some of the issues that he's had, like clock management. I've not been a big fan of his as far as clock management. As a whole, I always put Lovie somewhere in the middle of the pack as far as coaches overall, maybe close to the 10 mark as far as coaches. And again, I saw him every game that he's coached, so I've had problems with his clock management. I've had problems with some of his decision-making. The same thing with some of his personnel decisions, and some of his offensive coordinators that he's brought in. So, I mean, you might say that for any coach, but because I cover Smith, I can look at some of his issues, and, some of it's good, some of it's not so good.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan Hood, for joining our show today from ESPN
Thank
Chicago.
Thanks.